this is a recap of what we discussed in person. This is just to help you guys follow up on some of our discussions. So we're just talking about accessing remote data, right? We've built an offline application and we're transitioning to building an online application that communicates with a web app or with an API in this case. So we're using this free fake data API called jsonplaceholder, and you can see all the HTTP methods are supported by this. So one of the reasons why I decided to go with this was just because at least it supports get, post, put, patch, delete, right, which are the core HTTP methods that you need to be familiar with. And also as also discussed in person, you can test these APIs using Postman so that you validate the proper working process will be for you to be able to test the APIs before you start writing your mobile application code, so that if there are any changes you need the back-end team to make, you would have discussed that with them. So without wasting too much time, we're just going to focus on the get request and the post request. So if you look at the endpoints, we have /post and we have /post, and they're just differentiated by the HTTP method attached to them. So in most cases, you can have situations like this where there's the same endpoint, but the methods attached to them is what points to the difference. So for a post request, you'll be expected to send some payload, while the get request will just receive whatever payload the server returns. So let's look at this endpoint. So this endpoint basically returns a list, which is denoted by the square brackets, a list of objects. And you can see the objects are comma separated and the objects are denoted by your curly braces. So the objects have a couple of attributes: user ID, the ID of the post, the title, and the body. So we're going to represent that now in our Dart code. So let me shrink this and see if I can. Yeah. So let's have it like this. So we're just going to create a class post. So we need an int, a nullable int ID, then it's supposed to be a semicolon. Then we can just proceed with the other ones. Let's go with the user ID, which is a string, right? Sorry, an integer. This. So the strings are denoted with quotes. So we have another integer user ID. Then we have another final string title. Final string body. So we're also going to create a constructor for this. Let's see if I can use the shortcut. Yes. So we're going to create a constructor, which is what we are going to use to pass in the values of all these components. So for the ones that are highlighted in red, it's because they are not nullable. So we have to make sure that they are entered, right? That the user supplies the values of this particular component. So we can just say, we can just make them required. So I just formatted it. So the ID itself is not required, because when we are posting, when we're sending a new post, right, we are not going to be sending the ID. So the ID should be generated by at the back end by the server. Then next, we're just going to create a factory method for generating our post from JSON, and it's going to be map of string and dynamic. I'll call this JSON. So we're going to return the post. So our user ID is going to be JSON user ID So this is going to return a post from whatever JSON we receive from the server. So whatever JSON data we receive from the server, we're now going to read it in as a post, right? So since we are receiving data, we're going to be receiving user ID, title, and body. So might as well add ID here as well. I'm going to say JSON, and this is going to be ID. Let me format this to fix that indentation. So the next thing we need is our toJSON method. So from JSON, we are receiving JSON data and we're trying to convert it into a post object, right? Then the other way around, we are sending our object and we need to send it in form of JSON to the server. So we're now going to have we're going to return a map of string and dynamic. So this is string and dynamic, and this is going to be toJSON, and we're going to return a map. So the key is going to be user ID, so user ID. Then we're going to have title, and lastly we have body. I'm making this mistake. Body, and this is going to be body like this. Then we end this with a semicolon. So at this stage we successfully created our post model, right? So we can create a post instance using our constructor, and we can receive JSON data and convert it to a post so that we can display this post within whether it's a list or within a page and so on. Then lastly we have toJSON, so that when we are going to post our data, we now have to convert it from whatever form from our post object. We're now going to return this key value pairs, which is similar to this, without sending the ID, right? So at this stage we are done with our post object. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a repository. So I'll just create a new folder. I'll call it repository. So the repository is just going to facilitate all the communication with the API, right, between our mobile application and the API, so that we don't have direct interaction between our UI, our front end, and the API. So I'll just call this post repository. So I just realized that I've not installed HTTP. So I'm going to be using HTTP for to communicate with the internet. So I'm going to do Flutter pub or Flutter at HTTP. Flutter pub. So we'll run this command and get HTTP set up. So I'm guessing, yeah, we have HTTP and HTTP parser. So HTTP allows us, it's just a library that facilitates easier communication with our API, right? So that's what we're going to be using to make our get request and our post request. So we're going to create a class. I'll call this post repository, and within our post repository we're going to create let's say final string URL, and this is going to be this URL. So let's go back. So if you look at this is slash post, so it's going to be this URL. So luckily for us, both the get and post use the same URL, so we can just copy this and we can make it a string. So in a situation where you have multiple endpoints, right, you can have this as the base. You can take this and call it base URL, right? Then so let's just proceed with this, calling this the base URL. So we're now going to create a method that is going to receive a list of posts, right? So remember, this on its own is a list of posts, so we're going to receive a list of posts. So we're going to call this fetch posts, and it's going to be asynchronous. So once we have this, we can make our HTTP get request. So we're going to say final response. So remember when we discussed in person, whenever you send whenever you send information to an API, you are making a request. So whenever you make a request, you should anticipate a response. So we're going to get our response here. We're going to say await. So we wait for this HTTP dot get. So we're making a get request. So let me import HTTP. Import HTTP as HTTP. So get, we're now going to do URI so that we can parse this string into a URI. URI dot parse. And what string are we passing? We're passing say base URL slash post. So remember, our base URL is just this. So we're now adding this endpoint. We're saying get the base URL, then append this to it. So we've made our request, and there's going to be a response, and each response comes with a couple of things. So a response can come with status code, which is what we're going to use to check if we have a 200 status code, which means successful, right? It also has the body, which is going to be where our data itself is going to be stored. Is going to be where we fetch our data from. So we're going to say if response dot status code is equal to 200 means we have success, right? And I'll say list dynamic now create a variable called body, and we're going to JSON decode whatever JSON data is returned from the server. So if you want to see what the payload looks like, you can just do debug print, and you can say response dot body. So you can print this to just view what the API returns, which is just going to be basically the same stuff here. So once we have that, we can now return a list of posts. So we're going to return body.map, and this is going to be a dynamic. So which item, post from JSON, item dot to list. So basically what we are doing is we are getting each item, right? Each post, 1, 2, we are getting them from JSON, and we're now converting them into a list of posts. Then if this doesn't work, we now have to throw an exception. So we throw exception with a message failed to load posts. So with that, we've completed our fetch post method. So the first thing we do is we make a get request to this our endpoint, which is the same link we have here, right? So once we make the request, we are going to get a response back, which we store in this particular variable, and the response comes with a couple of properties like status code, body, headers, and so on. So we'll now see if the status code is equal to 200, which means we have success, right? Remember our HTTP status codes. If we have 200, it means we have success, and once it's successful, you can now get the response body and store it here as a value. Then this line is just for you to visualize, to see it in the terminal down here where you are running your application. Then we convert each of the items from JSON into a list of posts. Then if 200 is not the result we get, we now throw an exception that said fail to load post. So that's just basically our fetch post method. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create another method, post. In this case, we're just going to return a post, and this is going to be create post, and it expects us to have a post, to pass in a post object. So we're going to return a post. So if you test the post API for this, right, what it does is if you we test the post method endpoint, right, you obviously can't test it here, but you can test it in Postman. It takes a post, and it's still, once it's created, it returns back that post object to you. So that's why we're just returning a single post here. We demonstrated all this stuff in Postman, so just trying to refresh your memory. So we have response, just like what we did the first time. This is going to be into await URI. So we're going to pass our base URL / post. So in this case, what we're using is post, right? And the first parameter we're passing here is we're passing our endpoint, right? Then we have to pass in a couple of other things. Let me end this line. So we have to pass in our body. I'm just going to say JSON encode, then the post dot to JSON. So we're converting our post into JSON and we are sending that. So if you want to go further as well, you can create headers, and we can now pass in our content type. So our content type is JSON, so that's a content type. Application / JSON in this way. So let me just reformat the whole file. So this is basically what we have. So we've successfully sent our post, right? Then we're going to get a response back. So we'll handle this response to show the user if this post itself was successful or if it failed. So we can say if response.status code is equal to 201, which is created, right? So if you create a post, ideally it should return a 201. So we can now return post from JSON, and we JSON decode our response body, which is the single post we just created that will be returned. Then else we throw this time we say failed to create post. So we reformat the entire file. So with what we've done here, we successfully, whenever this method is called, right, we are going to pass in a post object, and we are then going to convert that particular post to JSON, which is what is now sent as the body of this request, of this post request. So this post request is going to return a post object back as part of the body of this response. So from this now, we now say if response or status code is equal to 200, which is created, right, then we now return post, we now return that particular object. So we're going to get that object as JSON, which we now decode, and we now return the post itself. I think we're done with the most part. So let me come back to main. So in the main class, I'll just import all this stuff to fix some of these errors that we have, and I'll just explain, because our main focus is not in the front end. So what we have here is we have the post. We are creating an instance of the post repository, right? Call it repository, and we're creating a list of posts, so that whenever we receive our posts, we're going to store it within this particular list. So when we start our application and init state gets called, we use our repository object to fetch the list of posts, and those list of posts are stored within this particular post list that we created. So if we come back to our view, just like the offline application we had, we now have a future builder that has a list of posts, right? And we pass in our list of posts here. So we have some conditions here just to manage the connection state. So if we are waiting, we are going to just have this circular progress indicator till we get a response back. Otherwise, if the snapshot has an error, we now say error, then we now pass in the message. So this snapshot error is just basically going to be those messages that we passed in, if those exceptions that are thrown. Then otherwise, we return a list view builder, right? So we have the item count, which is snapshot data.length, which is how many posts we have. So if you look at this, I think there are 100 posts. So there should be 100 tiles. So it's going to return 100 list tiles to us. So for each of them, we're going to be presenting the title and the body, right? So we're going to have all that. Then we have a floating action bar that calls this method, this send post method, right? So this is just used to trigger our create post. So if you come here, you're going to see the send post method, and what it has is we are creating an instance of this particular post object. I was saying hello Flutter, and this is a test post. We're passing the user ID to be 1, right? So if you were building this where someone is going to type the values, right, you would have probably had something like maybe string title, string body, then the user ID. You can fetch it from when the user logs in. If you've saved it using shared preferences or using HiveDB or Objectbox, right, you can now pull that and pass that value here. So once you pass that value here, you can now make your post request. So when we're making our post request, we're going to wrap it within our try catch block. So we have this try block, and we are creating a new post. So we name this created post, and we're going to await for the create post method's response. So remember, it returns a post object, so that's why we have this here as type post. So that post object is now going to be stored within this created post. Then we have a scaffold messenger that shows a snack bar that shows success created post with created post.id. So this is going to be the ID of the post that you just created, which for this particular API should be 101, because you already have 100 here, right? So the next ID should be 101. Then if it doesn't work for some reason, we're now going to catch the exception, and we're just going to say error creating post, right? So to show you from the top again, created an instance of repository, created an empty list of posts to store when our post is returned from the API. Then we use our repository to fetch the post and store it within the list within init state. All right. Then we have a method for sending posts. Let me remove this so that we see the full picture. For sending posts, right? And we create a new post with our constructor. So once the new post is created, we can now use our repository to make that post request to the API. So we're using repository create post, then we're passing in this new post object that was created. So if it's successful, we're now going to display a snack bar that shows success created post ID, then the ID number, which is 101. But if it throws an exception, then we catch that exception and we now show error creating post. Then yeah, this is our user interface, which is just basically almost a repetition of what we had with our offline application. So this part is basically the same. It's basically the same. So I think the next thing we need to do is to run it. So one moment. Started running it on my device, just waiting for it to get installed, and let's see what we have. Alright, so we have our result here on the device. Right, so we have our result here on the device, 100 of them. So let me just scroll to the bottom just so that we can confirm. So you can see the same jargon lorem ipsum data, right? And if we click our plus icon, it should be able to send that and return our snack bar for us. So in this case we have an error for some strange reason. So let me see if I can debug that and we try again. Alright, I hope I figured it out this time. So the only issue I noticed was I spelled post without the S. So let's try it again and see. Okay, success created post ID 101. So you can see a small mistake in the name of the endpoint, right? Created that, so I have to just take my time to look at what the issue is. So in case you are following along the first time, just know that this when I was adding the endpoint, I only wrote /post instead of posts in plural. So this is just basically the basics. We just scratch the surface of like just making a simple get request and post request in Flutter. However, there are a lot of things that are involved. There are situations where you need an API key, a bearer token, and so on, right? State management for dealing with like apps that have like so many components and you don't know when data is changing and how you can use set states to represent that. Well, I hope this helps.